Hi, it's time for a fundamentals video about two-note NuTone door chimes. I get a lot of questions from people about two-note door chimes, and as I have said in other videos, there's a lot of things that I take for granted that everybody knows, and it turns out that they don't. This is going to be a new type of video. It's going to be what I call a multi-section video. It's going to be one video broken into probably 4, could be 5, you never know, sections, and when it's all done, in the title of the video and in the video description, which is down there, it'll break it down into the different topics and times that those topics start, and that way if you don't want to see part of it, you can just look at the part you're interested in. We're going to be talking about this. This is a standard large size NuTone two-note doorbell or door chime. You can go either way, doorbell, door chime. I use them interchangeably. Technically, they're door chimes. This particular one is from a model LB76, and it was made in 1979. It doesn't really matter when yours was made. It could have been made in 1936, or it could have been made in 2019, and basically it's the same. It might be a different color, it might be somewhat of a different shape, and most likely it will be somewhat of a different size. This is a large body chime. It's about twice as tall as a small body chime, but it doesn't really make any difference because they all work fundamentally the same way. Here we have on the whiteboard a diagram of this chime. So let's look at the anatomy of a two-door, two-note NuTone door chime. You have the chime base, which is the large square. On the chime base, you have two resonators, one here and one here. The resonators are this box right here and this box right here. And if you look carefully, you'll see there's an opening in each one. And the purpose of the resonators are they help amplify the sound that the tone bars, the red lines, make when they're struck by the plungers. So without resonators, the tone bars would still make some noise, but it won't be as loud. Think of it as the way a guitar works. The reason that you have a big round opening in the body of your guitar and the strings go across the opening is the cavity inside the guitar amplifies the sound so you can actually hear it. Most two-note door chimes have two tone bars. The tone bars are made out of, generally they're steel, like these, or sometimes on really old vintage NuTone chimes, they might be made out of brass. But either way, they're metal bars, and they're made to a specific length, and they're made to a specific thickness, and they roughly generate a certain type of musical note. This particular chime, stamped on the tone bar on this side, it says C, and stamped on the tone bar on this side, it says D. So that would be the note C and note D, I guess. I'm not a music guy, so I'm just guessing there. In the center of the chime is the power unit. The power unit is where the wires are connected, and also inside the power unit are where we have plungers and springs. Now, I called this a two-door, two-note door chime. What does that mean? Well, it means that it can ring differently for two different doors. Say, for instance, you have a button on your front door, but you also have a button at your rear door. It would be nice if the chime rang differently, so when a visitor came to the front door, it'll go ding dong, but when the Amazon guy leaves a package at your rear door and hits the button before he runs off, it only goes ding. And that way you know where the person was when they pushed their button. Since it has to ring differently for two different doors, we have two plungers. We have the front door plunger up here and the rear door plunger down here. And the plungers are very simple. They're metal rods and they have springs around them. When you energize it, it moves down and it goes ding, and when you let go, it pops back and it goes dong. It's very simple. So this is the front door. And down here, this is the rear door. And if you look right here really carefully, there's a bumper in the way. So when it energizes, when the Amazon guy pushes the button, it goes down and it goes ding. But when you let go, it doesn't make any sound because it hits the bumper and it stops before it hits the second tone bar. that's what we have here. This little black line is the bumper that prevents it from making 2 notes. On the power unit, there are 3 screws where the wiring will be attached to make the chime operate. And typically, the way it will be labeled is R for rear, T for transformer, and F for front. Sometimes, depending on when it's made, it may actually say rear, trans, and front. Sometimes it says rear, transformer, and front. It doesn't really make any difference how it's labeled because you know which wire goes where to make which solenoid become energized. Inside the power unit, which we'll see in a minute, there are 2 electromagnetic coils, but that's for the next part. So this is the basic anatomy of a 2-note, 2-door NuTone door chime. This is section 2. Section 2 is called the anatomy of a 2-note, 2-door power unit. So here we have an actual power unit. If it looks familiar, it's because it's out of the LB76 from the last section. So what is the power unit? Well, it's the working part of a 2-note door chime. It has the 3 screws where the wires become connected. It has 2 plungers with springs. And these, that one stuck a little bit. These actually can be taken out like this. And inside, the most important parts are 2 electromagnetic coils. See all the shiny red wires? There's one, and there's the other on the other side. This one is for the front door, so that makes ding and dong. And this side is for the rear door, so it only goes dong. These are both the same coils. They're made in the same way. So let's look at how this works. So here's our illustrated jumbo size, see? Jumbo size door chime power unit. We have the 3 screws on the front. They're labeled rear, trans for transformer, and front for front. And underneath down here, as a reminder, it says do not oil. We'll talk about that at the very end. Here we have our 2 plungers. They have plastic tips on them. This one's a pointed tip, so it hits the tone bar. This one has a flat tip because it's going to hit the bumper to prevent it ringing the second note. And wrapped around each plunger is a coiled spring. Pretty basic. Inside the power unit, these represent the 2 electromagnetic coils. This is the coil for the front door because it's on the right, so it would be here. And this is for the rear door because it's on the left, and it would be there. Inside each electromagnetic coil, there is a tube that goes down the center of the coil. Now, if you remember back to 6th or 7th grade science class, you probably played with electromagnets and dry cell batteries, and you wound it around something and made a coil and put something metal in the middle of it and picked up paper clips or something. So think back to 6th or 7th grade science class. The reason there's a tube inside the coil is you need some place for the plungers to slide up and down, and it's the magnetic force of the coil when electricity is applied that pulls the plunger down to make the first note, and then when you let go of the button outside on your front porch and it shuts off, the spring makes it pop back up and make the second note. In most modern NuTone chimes, say starting around the early 1970s, the tube inside the coil will have a plastic sleeve. Think of it as a large diameter plastic straw. And the reason they did that was to make the plungers slide more freely. And again, at the end of this section, we'll talk about the potential problem with that. Here we have an expanded drawing, and it shows all of the little red wires that are wound around the tube to make it into an electromagnet. They both have red wires wound around them. I just left them off on this one so you could see the tube inside the center. Here on the bottom of each coil are the wires that come out that are the beginnings of the windings as it goes around and around and around, and then the end of the windings here, because if you're going to apply electricity to it to make a magnetic force, you have to have 2 ends to do that with. So here are the 2 ends on the left coil, and here are the 2 ends on the right coil. Here we have a representation of the 3 screws, same as here, where the wires from the coils are going to get connected to. So how do the wires get connected? It's actually very simple. The right-hand wire from the front coil gets attached to, wait for it, the screw that says front. like this. The left-hand wire on the left-hand coil that's for the rear door, you should know this by now, it gets attached to the screw that says rear. But where do the other two wires get attached? Because we have to get electricity through the coil to make the magnetic force to make the plunger move so it goes ding. Well, these two get paired together like this, and then guess where they go? Well, we only have one choice left. They go to the transformer screw, and that's how the power unit is wired. And if you look here really carefully, you can see here rear screw, transformer screw, front screw, and if you look right here up on the tabs, you'll see there's a little bit of solder, and there's actually the ends of the wires. So the left-hand coil, which is the rear door, comes through a little hole here, and then it's soldered in place. The right-hand coil, one of the wires comes through the little hole, and it's soldered in place, and then the second wire from each coil comes into the hole for the transformer, and it's soldered in place, just like I show here. Now, there were two things we were going to get back to. The first thing we're going to get back to is the do not oil. Over time, plungers in power units, I don't care how clean your house is or anything like that, eventually over time they become sticky and not move very freely. And sometimes they need to be cleaned. So what don't you use? Well, obviously you don't use oil because it says do not oil. Okay, and this do not oil, NuTone has been putting do not oil on their door chimes since the very first one they ever made in 1936. So do not oil. Do not oil also means do not put lithium grease, do not put WD-40, do not put graphite. The only thing that you're supposed to use ever to clean these are lighter fluid. And when I say lighter fluid, I'm not talking about the kind of stuff that you put in your barbecue on Friday night because you want to make some bratwurst. I'm talking about the kind of lighter fluid that your grandpa used to use in his Zippo lighter. You know, that guy that probably fought in the Korean War or maybe in Vietnam, and he always had the Zippo lighter in his shirt pocket with the cigarettes. That kind of lighter fluid. So this is Zippo lighter fluid. You can also use Ronson lighter fluid. That works perfectly fine also. And all you really need to do, you only need a little bit of this, is you would simply, you don't even have to take the door chime down. All you have to do is take the lighter fluid and you squirt just a little bit on the bottom edge of the plunger right there, and then you go like this and work it up and down, and it will dissolve the grime and stuff that's in there, and then all of a sudden it'll pop back to life and everybody will be happy. The other thing that we were supposed to get back to was a tip about the plastic straw. And no, the plastic straw will not melt if you put the lighter fluid in it. It's a time-honored tradition that all NuTone service guys like myself were taught back in the old days when NuTone cared about the things that they made. So do it the right way. But the plastic straw can be a trap sometimes. I've seen this happen in many, many times. People will call me and they'll say, I walked by my doorbell the other day, it's a 2-note doorbell just like this, and it was making kind of a buzzing sound. Why was it doing that? And then it stopped. If you have a house that's 15, 20, 25, 30 years old, and the button outside on your front porch is kind of old and crusty, and if it sticks and when you push it, it doesn't release all the way, which is how the chime shuts off, the coils will remain energized a little bit. Not enough to make them ring. It's not going to go ding dong, ding dong, ding dong over and over and over again, but it's going to have a little bit of electricity go through, and what's going to happen is this plunger is going to get pulled down a little bit, not enough to make a note usually, just part of the way, but the coil is staying energized. That's why the plunger is pulled down part way. And these type of coils, they're not really designed to be turned on and running with electricity through them for any really long period of time. Average operating time for a coil like this, in most doorbells, a couple seconds, not 3 days. So if the coil stays energized all the time, it's going to become hotter and hotter and hotter over time. There is no chance for fire, and odds are you will not actually burn up the coil because it's a pretty beefy little coil and it holds up pretty well. But what does happen is, because the coil gets hot, the plastic straw that's in the middle, and it is very much like a drinking straw, it will begin to melt. And when it begins to melt, it gets all deformed and kind of crinkly and stuff inside, and what will happen is the plunger will get stuck in the solenoid because the plastic straw has melted and it won't move anymore. And then when you finally figure out it's the button, or when the Amazon guy comes and pushes it again and then it releases all the way and it shuts off, then you realize I don't have a working doorbell anymore because the plastic sleeve has melted. There is no way to fix the plastic sleeve. The only thing you can do at that point is either get a new power unit assembly or buy a new door chime. The workaround for it temporarily, because of course, you know, your mother-in-law is going to be coming that weekend and you don't want to not have a working doorbell. That would be bad. And you'll see this in the upcoming section, is you can move the connection from the front door to the rear door. At least you'll have a single note that works. It won't be ding dong, it'll only be ding. But you can tell your mother-in-law that you're just bucking the trend and you want to be different than all your neighbors, and one ding is certainly enough. This is section 3. Section 3 is entitled The 4 Parts of a Door Chime System. Because yes, it is a system. So what are the 4 parts of your 2-note, 2-door chime system? The heart of the system is actually the door chime here. Very simplified drawing, but at this point you should get the point. That's part number 1. Up here we have a transformer. The transformer is the power source for the doorbell system. Modern doorbells or door chimes are 16 volts. Starting sometime in the 1960s, 16 volts was adapted as sort of the default standard. Before that, it varies somewhat. Could be as low as 10, could be as much as 24. But for modern chimes, it's 16 volts. So it requires a 16 volt AC transformer, not a DC transformer. And the transformer should have a rating of somewhere between 15 and 30 watts. Or for all you modern folks, volt amps. I prefer watts because it's easier to understand. The larger the number of watts, the more oomph the plungers have when they strike the chime, the more noise they'll make, and the better it works. I'm partial to 16 volts at 30 watts because why not? That's part number 2 of your chime system. Part number 3 of your chime system are the push buttons. And it doesn't matter whether you have a single front door button or a single rear door button, or you have both. It still counts as one part because they're both buttons. The last and final part, you're trying to figure out, well, where's the other part? The other part is really important. It's the wire that connects it all together. Typically, and most common, the wire that's used in doorbell systems will be a 2-conductor. That means there are 2 wires twisted together. It will be an 18 gauge, and normally it will be a solid wire because that's standard doorbell wire in quotes. If you go down to your local home improvement center and you tell the guy in the aisle, if you can find him, that you need some doorbell wire, he's going to direct you to a spool of wire that is 18 gauge, 2 wires, usually in a jacket. It'll have an insulating jacket around it just to make it easier to put it in. And most commonly, the wires will be colored red and white. A little side note about the colors of the wires. As I have told many people in many videos, the electrons do not care what color the wire is. You can have red and white, you can have red and black, you can have red and green, you can have brown and orange. Why brown and orange? Because Earl the electrician in 1976, when he was wiring up our LB76, he had spools and spools and spools of 18 gauge brown and orange wire left over from some other job that some other customer had already paid for, but it didn't get all used up. So being a conscientious and cheap sort of guy, Earl was reusing the orange and brown wire as much as he possibly could to make a few extra bucks on every installation. So good on him. It doesn't matter what color the wires are. Nobody cares as long as it gets hooked up the right way. It doesn't make any difference. These are the 4 parts of your NuTone chime system. Part number 1 is the door chime, part number 2 is the transformer, part number 3 are the buttons, and part number 4 are the wires. Now we're going to show you how to hook it all up. So this is section 4. Section 4 is how is my NuTone 2-note, 2-door chime system wired up, and that's what I'm going to show you. This section is going to cover the preferred way to wire up a door chime. This is the way that probably 90% of all door chime systems are wired in the world. There is an alternate way which I will briefly cover in the last section, but this is the way you normally will find it having been done. So Earl, the electrician, is out on the job site and he's got to wire this system up. The chime is the hub of the system. It's in the house, and it's the spot that all of the wires from all of the other 3 devices are going to run to. From the transformer, Earl's going to run his wire from the transformer to the chime. And remember, it's a 2-conductor wire, so we have orange and brown. And we're going to separate them out here a little bit so it's easier to see. So wires go from the transformer to the chime. Then he's got the rear door button, and Earl's getting a little lazy at this point, so he's not going to make it as fancy. He's just going to go like this, and then he's going to go like this and wire the rear door button to the chime. And he's going to do the same thing for the front door button. Like that. See, all of the wires from all of the 3 remotely mounted parts of the system. Front door button's on the front porch, rear door button is by the rear door, surprisingly enough, and the transformer, well, it could be anywhere. Earl's a pretty traditional guy. He likes to put the transformer in the garage. But if he didn't have a garage, or someone else was doing it, your transformer could also be in the furnace area where the water heater is, in the attic, in the basement, mounted on the ceiling of a bedroom closet, next to the electrical panel. It could be virtually anywhere because it's really the electrician's choice to figure out where he wants to put it. If you need to find the transformer in your house because you don't know where it is, here's a tip. There's a basic rule that you follow when you're trying to figure out what someone did before you. And that rule is, installers are lazy. And that may seem odd, but it's often true. Here's one thing I can tell you for a fact. Earl the electrician did not take the transformer and mount it 200 feet down at the other end of the house and then run his orange and brown wires all the way to the front entry hall where the doorbell is going to be, because that would have been a lot of work. And Earl doesn't want to work that hard. He's got to get home on time and take a shower because he's got to go bowling tonight. So, you know, he's not going to do that. He's going to find the closest place that's acceptable to put the transformer, and that's where it's going to end up. And unless someone on the job complains later on, that's where it's going to stay. So start off someplace close to the chime and then go work outward until you actually find it. Okay, get ready. Here comes the big payoff. Earl has wired all of this and 3 months has gone by. And he's back on the job site trimming out the house, and he's got to put in the buttons, and he's got to put in the transformer, and he's got to mount the chime on the wall. And coming out of a hole in the sheetrock behind the chime are his 3 pairs of wires. The orange and brown wires from the front button, the orange and brown wires from the rear button, and the orange and brown wires from the transformer. Now, if Earl was really smart, he would have marked which wires came from where. But odds are he didn't, because he's not too concerned about it. If you need to figure out wires, if all you have is a bare sheetrock wall with a hole knocked in it and all of these wires coming out, then you have to figure out which is which. So it's pretty easy to figure out which wires come from the transformer because they have electricity on them. It's only 16 volts, so it's not going to kill you, but it's enough. Actually, if you want to cheat and you don't have a voltmeter, you can take the wires and scrape them across each other like this, and it'll make a little tiny spark. It's not going to hurt the transformer, but you can tell which one has power. The button wires, that's a little more tricky to do, but I'll explain a practical way to do that at the end. Now let's get to hooking up our chime. So Earl's got to trim it out. He's got all the equipment mounted in place and he's ready to hook up the wires. So how do you do this? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You start with the transformer wire and you choose one of the 2 colors. It doesn't matter which color it is because the electrons don't care. In this case, Earl's going to pick the orange wire because Earl likes orange. And the orange wire goes from where it comes out of the wall and it gets attached to the transformer connection right there. And that's all you have to do with that individual wire. That leaves the brown wire. So where's the brown wire going to go? Well, the brown wire, it's kind of similar to the orange wire, but not really. We have a brown wire from the front door button and we have a brown wire from the rear door button, and oddly enough, they're going to get connected to the brown wire that comes from the transformer. Like this. we'll extend this one out, we'll stretch it out a little bit, and we'll take this one and connect it to it, and we'll take this one and connect it to it just like that. So now we have the orange wire from the transformer connected to the transformer terminal, and we have the brown wire from the transformer connected to the brown wires that go to each of the doorbell push buttons. What does that leave us? That leaves us with two orange wires. One orange wire from the rear door and another orange wire from the front door. Pretty simple. Can you figure out where they're going to go? I'll give you a second. Okay, if you haven't figured it out now, go back to the beginning and start all over again. The front door push button, the orange wire from it, oddly enough, as shocking as it may seem, it's going to go to the screw that says front. How shocking is that? Did you see that coming? I sure didn't. And the orange wire from the rear door button, and if you haven't figured this out now, then I don't know, maybe it's time you call someone. The orange wire from the rear door button goes like this to the rear screw. And that's it. That's all there is to it. That's how a standard two-note door NuTone door chime is wired. If you don't have a rear button at all, then you would eliminate the wires this and that would be connected for the rear door, and you would just wire it up as a front door. It's very simple. You can have one or the other, or you can have both. It doesn't really make any difference. Should I explain to you how this works, how the electricity flows, or do you not care? Well, I'm going to explain anyway because I care, and you should know. So the transformer supplies power to the chime all the time. It's always turned on as long as the electricity is on in the house. One side of the power from the transformer comes down and it's connected to the transformer terminal on the power unit. So the electricity flows this way. That's the little blue arrows, like this. The power unit assembly is getting half of the electricity from the transformer directly from the transformer. The other half of the transformer electricity comes down the brown wire, and it's like this. And since the brown wire is connected to the other two brown wires, the electricity makes a turn and goes down those wires. This way, and the electricity is going backwards. Now it made a turn, and now it's going to go the other way. Electricity is pretty smart. It always works out. And the electricity goes all the way down the brown wire to the connection on the back of the button where the little screw is. We got to get it all the way there, like that. Since the push button is a switch, just like the light switch on your dining room lamp, when the button's not being pressed, the switch is open. When somebody comes up, the Domino's pizza guy, and pushes the button, it closes the switch so the electricity can flow through. Domino's pizza guy shows up, pushes the button, the electricity flows through the switch, and where does it go? It goes back down the orange wire because it flows. It's like the water in a garden hose, only different. So it keeps flowing, and it keeps flowing, and it keeps flowing. God, it got to go a long ways, like this, and like this, and like this, and eventually it ends up on the screw that says rear. And that energizes the coil in the power assembly, which pulls the plunger down, and it hits the tone bar, and it goes ding. Then the pizza guy lets go as he jets up the walkway because he doesn't want to be there any longer than he has to. And the spring on the plunger makes it go back up, but it doesn't go down because it hits the bumper, so you only get a single note. That's how a door chime works. This is the most fundamental circuit that there ever could be. And when I have trained new guys, I work with them and work with them and work with them until they understand this. Because if you can understand this, this applies to everything else that we do. So it's a very fundamental thing. This is the fifth section of this video. In the fourth section, I showed you how 95% of all two-note, two-door NuTone door chimes are wired, and now I'm going to show you how the other 5% are wired. Door chime systems that are wired in this way, no, they should turn in their screwdriver and go home. In the previous design, the door chime was the hub of the system. In this type, the transformer is the hub of the system. And as we talked about in the last section, the transformer could be located anywhere in your house. In the garage, in the basement, in the attic, in the furnace area where the water heater is, in a bedroom closet, could be anywhere next to the electrical panel. Very popular from what people tell me. In this type of layout, the transformer is the hub of the system. Everything else is spread out from that point. This is not the preferred way to do this, but if you have it, you have to deal with what you have. So in this type of installation, all of the wires are wired back to the transformer. And there is a difference, so you have to pay attention. As we had Earl do in the previous version, there are two wires that go from the rear door push button to the transformer, one orange and one brown. And there are two wires that go from the front door push button to the transformer, one orange and one brown. But in this type of installation, the number of wires between the transformer and the door chime will depend on how many of the three terminals you're going to use. If you're using transformer and front, because you only have one button, you need two wires. If you're using rear transformer and front, because you have two buttons, you need three wires. So how many wires you have will determine how many wires go between the transformer location and the doorbell. In this example, we have two buttons, so we need to have three wires. And this is where it gets confusing sometimes. Since Earl, the electrician, is trying to use up all of his orange and brown wire, he doesn't have any single strands, and he's not going to sit there and untwist 85 feet of wire just to use one of the two. So what he's going to end up doing is running two sets of orange and brown wire. And this is how it gets confusing for people, because it's like, what? Why is there a wire that isn't used? So we'll have, and we'll draw these a little differently. There's one, and this will be the second one. And of course we need our matching brown wire to go with it. And same thing here, like that. And these wires go down and end up at the transformer. So right off the bat, you can see this is more confusing than it needs to be, because here at the chime, where we need three wires, now we have four. One of the wires will become unused, but if you're dealing with this 35 years after Earl put it in and you don't know how he did it, it makes it extra confusing. Once the wiring is all installed and Earl comes back to trim out the system, he has to hook everything up. Hooking it up is very similar to what was done before. He's going to choose a single wire from the four wires that go to the chime, and that's going to get connected to one of the terminals on the transformer. Since Earl likes to hook up the orange wire directly to the transformer first, he's going to grab this orange wire and it's going to go down and hook up to one of the terminals on the transformer. The brown wire from each of the push buttons will be connected to the other terminal on the transformer. So the last thing we have to hook up now are the second wires from each of the push buttons. The orange wire from the front door button and the orange wire from the rear door button. And this is where it gets a little tricky, so pay attention. We have an orange wire here and an orange wire here. We only have one orange wire left here, and we have two brown wires. So there's going to be a point where one of the wires has to switch colors, which also makes it more confusing for people. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the orange wire from the rear door button and we're going to connect it to the brown wire in the pair of orange and brown that Earl used when he hooked up the transformer line directly. And Earl should have connected this here. Now it's connected to the power unit. So the rear door button, the orange wire, gets connected to the brown wire in that pair, and it goes over and gets connected to the rear screw. See how complicated that is? Whenever you switch colors, it becomes complicated for people to do. Now we have the orange wire left from the front door button, and we have to choose one of the two wires in the remaining pairs of wires that are unused, how we're going to do that. since Earl's a sensible guy, even though he wired it like this and he shouldn't have, this wire gets spliced on to the unused orange wire, which then gets connected to the front screw. We have a remaining wire. We have the unused fourth brown wire, and that's not used anywhere. It's just an extra wire. This is not a good way to do this, but this is the way some electricians will wire a doorbell. They usually do it because the button and the transformer are relatively close together, so you use a little less wire and then you wire it to the chime, and you see this more in houses and subdivisions than you do in custom houses, and you should never really do it this way. It's just very complicated, and it limits what you can do with all of this. If you want to improve this, change the chime, do something else, it just makes it really complicated. So if you've got a layout like this and it's kind of a big mess, then you know, you got to deal with it. It's just a lot more to sort out. One of the things that people ask me all the time, and one of the things that's really common that I see on many YouTube videos about doorbells, are people are out there telling everybody, you got to put a diode on the button. So what's a diode? Well, the diode is an electronic component. And this is the symbol for a diode, and usually this is colored in black. Diodes are very useful little devices, like this. See, I should have gone to art school. That represents a diode. Diode has two ends. You have the anode and the cathode. Doesn't make any difference to you because you don't need one. While they can be used in a lot of different circuits for a lot of different things, and it is a fully electronic part, they're primarily used for two things that you would care about. Diodes can change AC voltage, like your AC transformer voltage for your door chime, into DC voltage, like batteries in a flashlight. Doorbells don't work on DC. Doorbells work on AC. The other things that diodes do are they only allow the flow of electricity to go in one direction. They go from this side to this side. This line right here, think of it as a fence or a wall. It won't allow the electricity to go back this way. The electricity will try and try, but the wall will stop it. And the wall is pretty strong depending on what kind of diode you use. See, a lot of people on YouTube and a lot of people ask me, oh, I'm having a problem with my doorbell and it doesn't work right, and all these other on and on explanations about all the problems they're having. And I saw a YouTube video and the guy said, if I put a diode, it'll solve all my problems. There is no such thing as a magic diode. It doesn't exist. Diodes are rarely used on any door chimes. The only NuTone door chime that ever used a diode was a model LA52 musical door chime. LA52s came out in the mid-1970s, and they were available all the way through the early 2000s, and it played 24 different songs, and it was all very cute and adorable, and people really liked them. And you did have to put a diode on the button like this. And the purpose of the diode was to make the door chime ring or play the entire song once you took your finger off the button. That was its only purpose. That is the only NuTone door chime that ever used a diode. There may be other companies' door chimes that play songs, and we're talking about fully electronic door chimes. Not ones with solenoids and plungers and coils, but ones that have electronic circuit boards that are programmed to play songs. Sometimes maybe those require a diode. Your standard 2-note, 2-door NuTone door chime, all mechanical, they don't require diodes. And diodes are not magic. I've been trying for almost 40 years to invent the magic diode. I have yet to come up with it. As soon as I do, I'll let you know so you can buy a whole bunch of them and then I can retire. So this is the last and final section of this video. Troubleshooting a door chime system is really good practice for people who want to try to repair something themselves. It's relatively simple. It only has 4 basic parts to it. The layout's pretty standard, and I've done my very best to try to describe both types of installations that you'll find. Yours most likely is the standard one, not this mess. And with a little bit of time and a little bit of thought and a little bit of whatever, you should be able to figure it out. Couple helpful tips. It's always very helpful to label things as you go. I get a lot of people that contact me with a story like, we had a working doorbell, we went to paint our house inside, we took the doorbell down, now we've got wires sticking out of the wall, and nobody can remember how to hook it back up. And then they'll go, I've got a brown wire and an orange wire and a purple wire and a green wire, where do they go? It's like, I don't know, because it's not my house and I didn't wire it. And Earl didn't wire it, because if he did, we'd have brown and orange wire. Taking a picture of it with your camera or your phone is a really good idea. Also, putting masking tape on the wires and writing on them where they went, that's a really good idea also. Another thing which is very useful, which I tell people to do, and it seems like they push back on it a whole lot for some weird reason, is you can make a little drawing. Now, I make drawings all the time because I'm old school. When I first started, we didn't walk around with a phone in our pocket that took pictures or anything like that. In fact, back when I first started, if you were really well off, you could have a Polaroid camera, but who could buy the film for that? It's really expensive. So, you know, nobody took pictures of anything. So what did you do? If you were working on something like this mess and you have to try to figure it out, it can be really complicated. As the fellow who taught me a lot about troubleshooting used to say, there's no hero pay. What does that mean? You don't get paid anymore because you're trying to sort out this mess and you're trying to keep it all straight in your head. And because if you do, if you can mentally image the whole thing and keep it all sorted out in your mind without writing anything down, they'll pay me more, won't they? No, not really. They don't care. All the lady cares is when you leave, it works. So what did we learn to do? Well, we learned to do this. We made drawings. Now, this is not the drawing of a door chime circuit. This is actually a drawing of a circuit inside a NuTone stereo intercom receiver that I was repairing a week ago or so. Now, I've been doing this a long time and I've repaired lots of these, but when I have to take it all apart and I have to shuffle components around and add new things and work it all out and squeeze it all into a really tiny little space, and it's important not to get the wires back in the wrong place, because if you do, when you turn it on, there'll be a big puff of smoke and it'll all die. So what do? I make drawings, because when you make a drawing, it helps reinforce it in your mind so you have a better chance of remembering it. When I was in 8th grade in woodshop class, Mr. Forrest, he used to say that if you needed to remember something, write it down 3 times. Because if you write it down 3 times, odds are you'll remember it. So I make drawings. I'm still the guy nowadays, not as much lately, but in the past, when I go out and do service calls, if you have something really complicated like this that you have to sort of work through and figure out because somebody made a big mess out of it, especially if 4 other guys worked on it before you, I'm the guy with a piece of paper and I start drawing it out and writing it down and labeling things, and I tear it out and I put it in my shirt pocket, because that way, if I have to remember, just pull it out and look, because remember, there's no hero pay. So if you're going to troubleshoot something, remember, you need to be logical, you need to be methodical, you need to test and measure and draw a diagram and verify that what you think is actually what it actually is. The other thing I was taught during troubleshooting was, basic rule is you check and verify. If you make an assumption about something that you didn't check and didn't verify, everything that you do after that point of assumption is not valid, because you didn't verify that it's correct. And if you assumed incorrectly, then everything from that point could be wrong. And you know this, what they say about people who assume, don't you? I'm not going to say it because you should all know this, but you have to work through it logically. It's not that difficult, and don't be resistant to doing something like taking pictures, labeling wires, or making a diagram. I'm not sure why people have such a hard time with this kind of concept, because it's actually a pretty easy thing to do. You just draw it out like this. This is just a big diagram of a door chime circuit. It's really not that hard. I hope you found this interesting, and hopefully for many of you it will be helpful. If it is, give it a big thumbs up on YouTube, because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.